So I will be looking down at my notes because I have a lot to say. So I just watched a video that was so disingenuous I had to respond. And the sexist and justification of abuse in the comments were alarming. So the video I'm referencing is the terrible relationship of Miranda and Steve from Sex and the City. It frames Steve as a manipulative gold digger who never loved Miranda. She claims that people try to say Steve is a saint, which he clearly wasn't, but her characterization of him is far from fair. And I feel there is a lack of criticism for Miranda in this video. Firstly, Steve and Miranda were toxic and should not have gotten back together after trying out dating. There are many reasons for this, and yet the video chose to spin these crazy, inaccurate narratives. There are claims that Steve bullied Miranda into going on a date with him, manipulated her into taking care of him, and literally trapping her with a baby, all with the sole purpose of mooching off of her, being a gold digger. Now, if you actually watch the show, or even in the video, the clips she uses directly contradict the narrative she's trying to spin. Miranda and Steve had a genuine connection. Hi, it's me later with my bonnet. Sorry, but I just wanted to cut in and actually describe to you the dynamic of Steve and Miranda's relationship. So it's a classic codependent relationship. And the whole thing with Miranda's character is that she is more masculine leaning, not only when it comes to style, but she's more assertive. She's more about, drive, making big moves, all about the business. There's even an episode where she fakes being a lesbian as a business move. There is the implication that Miranda isn't as attractive as the other women because she is more masculine. She's not girly enough, which this is mentioned in the video, which is why I don't understand why this connection was not made, and it seems like things were being misconstrued purposefully. As for Steve, Steve is very soft-spoken. People say it's a baby voice or whatever. He's very, very, very immature, goofy, and he talks like a little kid and he acts like a little kid. In many of the clips, it is shown that Miranda is struggling with, hey, am I feminine enough? Or like, oh, do I really need to change?
She ends up echoing what Miranda fears the most as an unmarried, child-free woman in her 30s, that she's not womaning right.
Crying on your shoulder. Jesus, I guess I really am a woman, huh?
Okay, this is really pissing me off. Vulnerability is not gendered. And the fact that she's allowed Steve to make her think that who she is inherently flawed makes my blood boil.
Here's the central thing. Miranda and Steve have a codependent relationship. And the way this video is trying to frame it is as if Steve is malicious and went into this relationship with a plan to not only destroy her life, but also get babied. Nurturing, taking care of something, those are very central traits of femininity. And so not only was she, physically attracted to Steve, she was sexually getting gratified by Steve. His whole childlike personality fulfilled that insecurity within her.
He's a kid, and I end up nagging him all the time.
Don't love babies with my suit. Oh my God, look at you.
I invited you to this thing. I want to pay for the suit.
No way. You're not buying me a suit.
But I wanted to do this for you.
Then I'd start to think of you like my mother, and that can get a little weird for me.
If anything, it was Miranda who planned on for him to be the baby. I don't agree with the fact that either of them planned on ruining each other's lives, or no, because as I explain later in the video, people are people. We grow up with insecurities and bad representations of love, and we just go about our day thinking that's normal, and we get into relationships and we're all toxic and fucked up. But because it goes unchecked and because we don't have good communication skills, Miranda, not intentionally, is fulfilling this feminine motherly role that's validating her in a way through taking care of Steve. Steve is codependent, you know, he obviously doesn't have many prospects. He likes to just sit on the couch, watch cartoons, like, you know. He is a man child, and she enables him to do that. I think the narrative that Steve is the bad guy, first of all, Miranda nor Steve are the bad guy. They are two flawed people who got into a codependent relationship, each of them benefiting in weird ways. They really loved and cared for each other, but it was very toxic. And the point of this video is to show that it seems that this person is misconstruing a lot of things to justify their hatred for Steve, when I don't feel it's justified. Like, yeah, he's shitty, but there was a huge lack of criticism for Miranda's part in this relationship. A lot of people in the comments were saying Steve is a monster and Miranda did nothing wrong. Again, there's a lot of clips that were used that highlight and show this, and yet the conclusion was a very different one. The video characterizes Steve using words like bully, force, and manipulation when Miranda was actually interested in him and he was interested in her. Their first encounter was obviously portrayed as playful banter, and it seemed the reviewer just thought Steve was being an asshole.
Look, that's really very cute, but I'm not really in the mood.
Not really in the mood, Steve.
I'm not a total bitch. I just had a fight with somebody.
Yeah, I heard. Boyfriend?
That's none of your business.
Girlfriend? Butcher.
Butcher?
The veal. I took a shot.
What are you reading?
I mean, yeah, that style of flirting isn't for everybody, but Miranda's reciprocation and shy smirks showed that she was vibing, and I mean, they literally sleep together that night. Miranda establishes that it was just a one-night stand, you know, I don't want to see you anymore. Now, there's the whole playing hard to get trope, which is inherently toxic, and this is not the only romance show / movie portraying it, not by a long shot. It's the idea that if a woman says no or they don't want to meet you again, then you just need to try again or try harder. In real life, if a girl says she doesn't want to meet up with you again, take her word for it. The ball is in her park. If she decides to change her mind, that's on her, but no, don't harass women, okay? But in the context of this show, the show is one of the many portrayals where Miranda did like Steve and his persistent efforts worked. She was disappointed by a lot of other guys and only saw Steve initially as a one-night stand, as protection from getting hurt again. The way it's being framed here is as if Miranda didn't like him at all and felt threatened by Steve and coerced to say yes. While in real life, this is not acceptable and this trope is harmful. You know how it always conveniently works out. But again, in the context of what is going on, I don't see it as fair to demonize Steve and say he forced her to date him. On the note of Miranda being manipulated into taking care of him, Steve was upfront about his financial status. He is a bartender with no prospects or future goals, so, you know, he's making less than Miranda's lawyer salary, and, you know, he doesn't have interest in doing much else in the future, so, you know, he's gonna stay broke. Now, despite Charlotte criticizing this class disparity, Miranda says she doesn't really mind. She had full knowledge that she makes more money and expressed no problem with it. Manipulation implies malicious intent, some sort of deception. I'm not seeing that here. Early in the relationship, Miranda takes Steve to get a suit, something he did not ask for. It was Miranda's idea and she intended to pay for it. When looking at the outrageous price, Steve gets uncomfortable with the fact that he can't pay for it. He went into this assuming he would be the one to pay for it. Miranda assures him it's her treat, but Steve ends up covering it with a check, only to later come to find out he had to return the suit because he actually couldn't afford it. He felt he wasn't at her level, and there was just a big disparity in the financial differences, and he wanted to break up. He felt like he couldn't give her what she deserves. Now, the video frames him breaking up with her over this valid reason as a red flag.
Why are you dressed like that?
I returned the suit. Couldn't afford it.
Then why didn't you let me pay for it?
Miranda, you need to be with a guy who's more on your level. Being in that store with you, I didn't feel good about myself.
You want to break up with me over a suit?
There's always gonna be things out of my reach.
It's acknowledged that Miranda gave in to Steve, but not without the framing of Steve bullying, forcing, or pressuring her as if she has no agency. And I'm trying to figure out how, if Steve's goal was to mooch off of Miranda, why would he fight to pay for the suit and then ultimately admit that he doesn't feel he can provide for her, so he breaks it off. After they break up, Miranda decides to go off birth control. Just take note of that. They try to remain friends, and they go out to dinner, and the reviewer snarkily comments on how Miranda paid for it, only to show the clip of Miranda saying he allowed her to pay finally.
So, thanks for coming out for dinner.
Well, thanks for letting me pay, finally.
Hey, that's what friends do, isn't it?
This implies, though he had less money, he still didn't want her to pay on every outing, and that Miranda offered multiple times, and only now he let her pay.
She was dating a bartender who worshipped her, and Miranda was so crazy about him in return that she let him take her out to dinner, but only to places she knew he could afford.
Again, how is this translated as manipulative gold digger? Of course, this friendship ends up turning sexual again. Like I said, they like each other, but they aren't well enough to see it's not a good fit. When Steve tells Miranda he loves her, the reviewer says it's only because he wants to live with her and escape his impoverished abode. Again, I'm not seeing the evidence of where this can be definitively said. It's true, Steve is shitty, but to paint him as having ill intent from the beginning, I don't see as fair. Some people can just be toxic, and that is what they think is normal. And when it goes unchecked, they don't realize it to be an issue. It's not their intention to go out and abuse and use people. I believe when he says he loves her, he means it in whatever way he perceives love, which again can be toxic for many. I don't think it was said with the sole intent to get Miranda to let him live with her. Basically, I don't think Steve is some evil vampire psychopath. I think he's flawed, and so is Miranda. Steve is messy, immature, naive, and pretty lazy. Their relationship definitely becomes codependent, but I don't think that was Steve's secret master scheme, and the relationship wouldn't have got to that point if Miranda wouldn't have accepted this unfair dynamic. The most alarming lie in the video is Steve trapped her with a baby, or attempted to. This is the most deliberate misportrayal I have ever heard, and I can't understand why it was said. So here's what happened. Steve sees a cute baby and mentions having a baby with Miranda. He comes off as very ignorant to how much work a baby would be and seems to be relishing in an unrealistic fantasy. Miranda, being more logical and level-headed, explains how it's too soon in their relationship to even think about that, and she is more focused on her career. Steve seems to be gushing over starting a life with her, romanticizing. But as stated before, his lack of maturity is stopping him from rationalizing the reality of having a baby. There wasn't any hint of aggressiveness from Steve, just genuine naivety or stupidity in, the magnitude of having children. And then Miranda had no problem voicing her side and stuck to her stance of not wanting to have a baby. Though it's early in their relationship, it's normal, if not vital, to discuss if the person you're with has the same plans for a family as you do. So that conversation that happened while dining out was trapping Miranda with a baby. If anything were to be taken away from this scene, it's Miranda not seeing their incompatibility in their plans on starting a family. But also, He's imagining a scenario where she's working and taking care of the baby. He has no plans of getting a better job. He's creating this very immature, naive, juvenile image of him watching cartoons with the kid. Oh, it's going to be oh so fun. Which is a huge red flag that this guy who is in his 30s, 40s has not grown up. And yeah, it's a red flag that she should have been like, oh, okay, I'm grabbing my purse, I'm gone. But
And living together for 2 months is way too quick, and I'm up for partner at the. We cannot have a baby. You're insane.
I want a baby to be fun.
That is not correct.
I'm not understanding the intent of saying he attempted to trap her with a baby. It conjures images of Steve poking holes in the condom or something with that verbiage, which, mind you, they weren't using condoms at all, as Miranda got chlamydia from him. While Steve seems to be blasé and ignorant about sexual health, which there's no excuse for, Miranda knows the consequences of unprotected sex and still did so. They sparked a sexual relationship again, and it was unprotected. She accidentally got pregnant. That's what happened. When Miranda found out she was pregnant, she contemplated an abortion without Steve's knowledge of her even being pregnant. So I have to ask again, how did Steve attempt to trap her? Though everyone wants to come off as a feminist, they really seem to remove any agency from Miranda. It was her choice to start dating Steve with the full knowledge she would be the breadwinner. She accepted him for who he was and was fine that he didn't want to be more than a lowly bartender. When problems arose, like his lack of consideration, immaturity, hygiene, she chose to stay with him. She left him for a little bit and still couldn't get over him, so she went back. She chose to have unprotected sex with him. She chose to keep the baby, and she proposed to him. The whole narrative of Miranda being a perfect victim to Steve's manipulation is not only inaccurate, but also does a disservice to her growth or lack thereof, as we see in the reboot. Instead of taking accountability and realizing she allowed herself to be in a relationship she was unfulfilled in for so long, all the blame is on Steve and where he fell short. Miranda is obviously deeply insecure, and that informed her decision on staying with Steve. She was not manipulated by him. He not only told her he was a lowlife, but he proved that to her and very early on. Many commenters echoed views of how Steve was evil and ruined Miranda's life. This makes it seem as if Miranda had no part in the toxicity of this relationship, therefore did nothing wrong, therefore no reason to change. Because of this, she ends up repeating the same mistake with Che. Speaking of Che, a lot of people like to justify her cheating on Steve with Che because he also cheated. The issue is, if you continue a relationship after a betrayal, like cheating, you are agreeing to move on and rebuild love and trust. You don't get to stew on it, whip it out, and get your revenge later. Two wrongs don't suddenly make a right. She did not have to take him back. There's a theme mentioned that women are always the one to change, but men aren't expected to.
Why is it the woman that always has to change and never the guy?
Who is holding Miranda to that rule or standard but herself? Instead of seeing how her and Steve were vastly incompatible, she lied to herself, saying everything is fine. She bent over backwards to make up for what Steve never put in. All this did was enable codependency. How is Steve expected to change when the problem isn't communicated? And the fact is, the problem was that they didn't belong together, and she stayed and kept coming back because of her fear of being alone. Neither Steve nor Miranda are evil. They are both deeply flawed and needed to work on themselves and how they view love and relationships before getting into one. So the framing of the video is completely inaccurate and in some places seemed intentionally misconstrued. With the lack of fair criticism to Miranda, it seemed like she was just trying to justify her hatred of Steve, and I think it painted him unfairly. Unlike their other videos, which seemed to be recaps of the show with funny editing, this one's tone had so much animosity. But it's just a TV show of fictional characters, whatever. It was some of the comments that really sent me off because of just the real world implications. Many women were saying Steve was worse than Big. Big, who is arguably a psychopath, who enjoyed toying, cheating, and hurting all the women in his life, and never showed an ounce of love or respect to Carrie. The same creator of the video that I'm referencing now has an over 3-hour long video specifically dedicated to how terrible Big is. So some were saying at least Big was upfront about how awful he was. I'm struggling to see how Steve leaving his poop-streaked underwear on the ground for Miranda to clean up wasn't upfront about his lack of respect for her. And again, with the way their relationship started and their amicable conclusion in the reboot, I don't believe Steve lacks empathy and gets off on intentionally hurting Miranda. The same cannot be said for Big. Some women were saying Big isn't as bad because at least he was rich. With the rise of many misogynistic and incel forums and online spaces, it is absolutely appalling and baffling to see women contributing to the narrative that women like abusive men as long as they're rich and handsome. That designer clothes somehow justifies emotional abuse. What's that term that incels use all the time? Oh, gold diggers, yeah. Mr. Big, the man who hides his first marriage from Carrie and his past of cheating, leads Carrie on only to move away multiple times, stalks her when she tries to move on, marries another woman only to cheat on that wife in their bed with Carrie, uses Carrie essentially as a torture sex doll for about 10 years, and when he finally agrees to marry her, because he's probably going to die soon, he humiliates her by leaving her at the altar. If you think all that is better because of the fact that Carrie was sitting comfy on a tower of cash, you need therapy. And if you think Steve is somehow worse than all of that, I genuinely don't know if you've actually watched the show. Even though clips in her review contradict the manipulative gold digger narrative she was trying to spin, she really did frame Steve to be some monster that he was not. No, Steve is not a saint. Their relationship was terrible and they should have broken up. But you really want to tell me Steve never loved Miranda and was only using her, but when she decides to step out on him after 20 years and pretending she was fine with the relationship, he refuses to take off his wedding ring. They were toxic, they were chaotic, it was wrong, but there was still love there. There was still love and care there. Sorry. Steve was immature, naive, and inconsiderate about a lot of things in life and definitely was not compatible with Miranda. But I don't think it's fair to say he's evil. Miranda enjoyed wearing the pants but chose to ignore her true feelings about Steve not really being the one because of her insecurity. The thought of still being single and lonely while all her friends got hitched scared her more than being in a loveless relationship. These were all valid points to bring up when talking about their terrible relationship. I don't understand why this video seemed to just perpetuate that Miranda had no agency and she fell victim to Steve's manipulative gold digging scheme and he never loved her. And hot take, Steve is worse than Big. Okay, well, that is all I had to say. Thanks.